Hello, Facebook Live. Sean Yesner here. So yesterday, I did a live behind the scenes recording as I recorded one of my podcast episodes for the Crushing Debt podcast. And I said that I would do another one immediately after. However, I had to go home because I had to spend time with the wife and kids. So I shot back into the office real quick this morning, get a couple of administrative tasks knocked out, a couple of client projects knocked out. And then I thought before I hook up again with the family for the rest of the weekend, I would do another behind the scenes recording of a podcast episode. So this week's episode is going to be all about networking. And you can see I'm wearing my PodFest Expo shirt. We're going to PodFest in February of 2019. Early March of 2019. But look for PodFest the beginning of every year around the February, March-ish timeframe. Great seminar for people that want to start a podcast, people that have video, people that want to be content creators, people who want to start a podcast, be on a podcast, start a YouTube channel, be a guest on a YouTube channel. All those different types of things are available at PodFest. And so I thought a great topic for this week's show would be my take on networking. And so I've got a list of all the different shows that I've put together that all center around networking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about networking as we go. Of course, if you guys have questions, let me know. Let me know in the comments. I'm going to record the episode. I'm going to have Facebook Live, at least the screen here on Facebook Live, minimized, so I won't see your questions until I'm done recording the episode. I need my notes up to record the episode. But once I'm done with the episode, I'll come back. If any of you have questions, that'll be bonus content for those of you that are watching on Facebook Live. And then when the podcast goes live, when this particular episode goes live, I'll also take the YouTube live video and shoot it up to, the Facebook Live video and shoot it up to YouTube. And good Lord, it's a lot of pressure when you know you're not going to be able to edit out the YouTube live stuff or the Facebook Live stuff. So I got to stop tripping over myself and tripping over my own tongue. But let me get my notes called up. I'll start up this week's episode of the podcast, and off we go. Yeah, thanks, Warren. I appreciate all the referrals I get. And actually, Warren, I've got a interesting question that I'm going to try to tackle on another podcast episode about how to give referrals back to multiple different realtor sources, referral sources. So I've got a lot of realtors that send me referrals, and I want to give back to all of you, but it's hard for me to generate a referral for each of you. So some interesting ways when you're in a profession where you're fed referrals by a lot of the same profession. How do you give back without making any one of your referral sources upset that you're not giving them direct referrals? So I'm going to be talking about that on a later episode. But let me get started on this week's episode. Again, I'm going to minimize the Facebook Live on my desktop, so I won't be able to see your questions. But as soon as I'm done, I'll come back. And if you have any questions, I'll go ahead and answer them. So without further ado, let's get started on this week's behind the scenes episode of the Crushing Debt podcast. Hang on here real quick. Got my notes up. Okay. And I need up. And here we go. On this week's episode of the podcast, networking. So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast. My name is Sean Yesner with Yesner Law. And as always, the show is sponsored by my law firm, but also, again, by the Crushing Debt book, 9 Strategies to Eliminate the Financial Bullies in Your Life. And I go through all different types of strategies, from short sales, foreclosures, loan mods, bankruptcy, IRS, student loan debt, all different types of debt that you might be facing. So if you're listening to this as I'm recording this, we're still just prior to Christmas. If you're listening to this episode just prior to Christmas, you can go to Amazon, buy a copy of the Crushing Debt book. Makes a great stocking stuffer. Or for those of you that are as sarcastic as I am, run up all your credit card bills, buying gifts for Christmas, including buying the book. And then let's talk about some strategies to eliminate all that credit card debt that you used to buy those Christmas presents. And again, I am tongue in cheek. I'm being sarcastic about that. But again, the book is on Amazon.com. It is called Crushing Debt. You can find it under the title. You can find it under my name as well. But like you heard in the introduction, this week I thought I'd deviate a little bit from the topic of crushing debt and talk about networking in general. And I think one of the reasons that those two topics do fit together, One of the things that I've always said is that in order to get more money, in order to make more money, you increase your income or you decrease your expenses. Well, obviously, networking is a great way to increase your income. Networking, word of mouth networking. Now, I'm not talking about internet advertising. I'm not talking about billboards. I'm not talking about pay-per-click. I'm not talking about any of that kind of stuff. I'm talking about word of mouth marketing, a lot of which has generated business and grown my law firm. The majority of the business that I get is through word of mouth networking. So that's what I thought I'd talk about. What I did was I went back and I looked at some of the older podcast episodes that I've done. And so if you want to listen to networking in general, one of the things you can listen to is my tips, tricks, strategies, how I go about networking at an event. That's episode 133 of the show. And I was getting ready to go to FinCon, which was this past February 2018 in Orlando. And I know that FinCon travels all over the country at the beginning of the year. So if you're interested in attending a FinCon expo or FinCon event, I would definitely look up FinCon on Google and you can go see where it is and go to the next one. I highly suggest you go. Fantastic event. But I dedicated an entire episode of this podcast, the Crushing Debt podcast, on how to network at an event like FinCon, how to network at an event where there are a ton of people in attendance. You can also look up episode 33, the business card graveyard. Tanya Cielo and I talk about the business card graveyard. So once you go to this big networking event and you collect all these cards, what do you do with them? Do they sit in your desk drawer and collect dust? Do they sit there until you toss them in the garbage can until you run out of room? Do you have a drawer in your desk that's just filled with business cards? Do you have a Rolodex, an old style paper Rolodex? Do you enter them in your phone? Do you look them up on social media? Do you contact these people? Do you make connections with these people? In other words, after you go to this networking event and you generate all of these business cards and contacts and connections, what do you do next? So episode 33 of the show, Tanya Cielo and I talk about the business card graveyard. Another episode, episode 17, going way, way back to the beginning, episode 17 is an episode that I did based on networking and running. And so what I did was, for those of you who don't know, I do a lot of running. I do a lot of 5K running. I try to run at least twice a week. I try to run probably about 10 to 12 races per year. And so what I did was I analogized networking and accomplishing your networking goals to running and accomplishing your fitness goals. And so accomplishing your goals, I think, are the same, whether you're trying to run and get in shape or whether you're trying to network and generate some more business. So episode 17 was all about that. Those of you who know me, who have listened to the show, know that I live in a community called West Chase. And West Chase has twice a year, has a community garage sale, typically in, I think, maybe May, and then again in October. They have this community garage sale. And every time they have a garage sale, one thing I realized is that garage sales are a very low pressure place to practice your sales skills, practice your people skills, practice your communication skills, because at most you've got a couple dollars at risk, either as a buyer or a seller. You've got something for sale for $1 or $2, and if you miss out on the sale, you don't miss out on a lot. Or you're trying to buy something for 50 cents, $1, $2, $3, whatever it happens to be. And if you don't negotiate, you miss out on spending that $2 or $3 or $5 or whatever it happens to be. So garage sales are great places to practice your networking skills, practice your sales skills, practice your negotiation skills. And so I have 3 episodes out all about networking and sales skills at a garage sale. Those are episodes 118, 86, and 68. And so you can check out those episodes of the podcast to hear more about my take about different sales skills, different networking skills, different marketing skills. Unfortunately, I missed this year's garage sale. As I record this was in October, and October is also my older son's birthday. So we went away for his birthday. I missed the garage sale. But as we get into the spring and we have our next garage sale, I'll definitely post another topic related to that garage sale around networking. One of the other organizations that I'm involved in here in Tampa is a global company called Asentiv. The purpose of Asentiv is to teach word of mouth marketing. And so we have a very strong Asentiv community here in Tampa Bay. And so I rely on a lot of those people. So I've done a couple of podcast episodes around and with different Asentiv trainers. One is episode 76, and the title of that episode is Living a Spectacular Life. And that was a party that we were having at my house. And of course, anytime there's a party in beer, the tech nerd, the geek in me, fires up the podcast equipment. And so we had a bunch of Asentiv people, a bunch of Asentiv trainers here in the Tampa Bay area who were at my house at the barbecue. I fired up the mobile podcasting equipment, and I talked to them about what they do to be successful, both in their Asentiv business, both as an Asentiv coach, as an Asentiv trainer, but then also in whatever other business they have. Typically, for a lot of us, our role in Asentiv is supplemental to our business. So I run the law firm here, but I also do a lot with Asentiv to help grow the law firm and the law firm's business. But my primary focus is the law firm. But how do I leverage Asentiv to live a spectacular life? And so that's episode 76 of the show. One of our Asentiv trainers here in the region is a lady named Tiffanie Kellog. Many of you are familiar with Tiffanie Kellog if you're in the area, if you're in the Tampa Bay area, or if you're regular listeners to my show. And so I have two podcast episodes specifically with Tiffanie Kellog. One is episode 12. The other is episode 48. And I think that episode 48 is a great flip of the podcast. And so what we did on episode 48 was, it's my show. It's the Crushing Debt podcast, but Tiffanie interviewed me on my show. And so I think the title of that show is something like Sean interviews Tiffanie interviews Sean, or something like that. But if you want to go listen to episode 48, that's a great episode in Tiffanie pulling out of me what makes a good connection for the law firm, what makes a good client for the law firm, who my referral partners are for the law firm, all that kind of stuff. That's episode 48. Another Asentiv trainer here in the region, another good friend of the show, good friend of the law firm, is Jason Avery. Jason Avery owns a couple of different companies. He is primarily a kitchen and bathroom remodeler, and so his construction company does kitchen and bathroom remodels all throughout the Tampa Bay area. He's won a ton of awards through his company all throughout the Tampa Bay area. But Jason also has a company called Constructing Success, where he teaches other contractors and other business professionals all about the customer experience, the customer roller coaster, and managing client expectations. And so episode 8, Jason was one of my very, very first interviews. Episode 8 of the show is all about constructing success. Episode 5 of the show is my why. In other words, why I do what I do. And so for those of you who don't know, I do a lot of training here in the region, here in Tampa Bay, about how to generate. I help a lot of business professionals generate referrals for their businesses. Now, a lot of the materials that I use in my training are from an organization called BNI. And as a trainer for BNI, I'm not allowed to also give you those materials for free. So I won't be necessarily talking about specific things on today's show. But one of the things that we talk about within generating referrals for each other is that it's more important that people know why you do what you do rather than how you do what you do. Simon Sinek, I read his book, Start With Why. I thought it was a fantastic book. It is that concept. In other words, teach people why you do what you do rather than how you do what you do. We don't necessarily need to know or want to know how the sausage is made, but if we know why you make the sausage, we're more inclined to buy from you. And so episode 5 of the podcast was my why, the reason that I do what I do. And it's interesting because a lot of people will say my family is my why. And my family is not my why in that way. And so I love my family, and everything I do is to support my family. And those of you that have known me for a long time know that I wanted to be an attorney since high school. I've wanted to be a husband and a father longer than that. And so I do what I do for my family, but my family is not necessarily my why. So I talk about that in episode 5. It has evolved. And so the title of the book, the subtitle of the book, 9 Strategies to Eliminate Financial Bullies. The bullying is a lot now of what has become what I've learned is my why I do what I do. And so a lot of it is to avoid what I perceive as the banks bullying my clients. That's a lot of the reason as to why I do what I do. But, what is your why? If you want to read Simon Sinek's book, that's a great book that'll tell you about it. Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. Fantastic book. I would highly suggest you get that book and then incorporate that into your messaging, incorporate that into your conversations with your referral sources. Why do you do what you do? And so those are all the different podcast episodes that I've talked about that talk about referrals or referral-based marketing or word of mouth marketing, that kind of stuff. We're not talking about network marketing. We're not talking about MLMs. We're talking about word of mouth marketing and growing your firm through word of mouth. But a couple other topics that I want to bring up on this show, today's episode, before I wrap it up. One of the questions that I get a lot is, I can't refer back to somebody who gives me a lot of referrals. So let me give you an example. We have the realtor. Now, the realtor, when they get a listing, they generate a ton of referrals. They generate a referral potentially for the title company, for the mortgage originator, the real estate inspector, possibly the real estate appraiser, the real estate attorney, the title company, all the different services, the pool contractor, the air conditioning contractor, the electrician, the plumber. The realtors can generate a ton of downstream referrals for these people. But then a lot of these trades, a lot of these professions, the title company, the mortgage originator, say, well, I can't give a lot of listings back to the realtor. When someone wants to buy a house, they don't necessarily call the title company. When someone wants to sell a house, they don't necessarily call their mortgage originator. They call the attorney directly. So how am I supposed to give back a referral to somebody that gives me a lot of referrals when I'm most of the time downstream from them? And I think the answer to that question is stop thinking about giving them business. In other words, you can motivate your referral sources by giving them things other than business. So if you can't give a listing back to that realtor referral source of yours, what if you could create an introduction that could give referrals to that realtor? For example, what if you knew the contact at a relocation company? And relocation companies are moving people in and out all the time. And so you could give the realtor an introduction to the relocation company. The relocation company would then give the realtor a steady stream of referrals. What if you could introduce that realtor to mortgage originators? So a lot of times before people buy a house, they go to a mortgage originator and say, what do I qualify for? What if you could introduce your realtor to the mortgage originator that could then send the realtor more referrals? What if you could help your realtor get more educated? What if you could do a presentation to a group of realtors to better educate them on how to do their jobs better? A lot of times I'll go out and I'll do speaking engagements to realtors about how to avoid legal liability or the different versions of the contracts that are used down here in Florida. In other words, I can't give the realtors back a referral all the time, but I can give them additional education that will make them more valuable in the marketplace, that will help them generate their own referrals. So a lot of times what you'll learn, a lot of times what I teach is that referrals aren't necessarily tit for tat. So if someone gives you a referral, you can give something back that's not a gift, but you can give them something back that will help them generate more referrals. One of the other things that I talk about are tips and strategies at events. So I talked about one of the first things on this episode, I talked about how to network at an event. Well, there's a lot of tips and strategies and techniques, a lot of which I talk about in episode 133, but a lot of tips and strategies and techniques that you can use at an event. One of the best things I learned in my years of networking is that you don't go to the event trying to sell, because there aren't very many people at the event that are trying to buy. And gosh, I learned that the hard way at FinCon. My book, the Crushing Debt book, came out that week of FinCon. I pushed to get it out that week of FinCon. And I brought, I think, 125 books with me to FinCon, gave away a bunch, sold one, because nobody wanted to buy the book at FinCon. Everybody wanted to get all the free stuff that the other vendors were giving out. Nobody wanted to pay money to buy the book. So when you go to an event like that, you have to think ahead and say, what am I doing there? Am I going there to sell something, or am I going there to get some information, or am I going there to buy something? And one of your goals should be to set up one-to-ones, set up meetings after the meeting. And so one of my goals at FinCon was to be a guest on a certain number of podcast episodes or YouTube episodes, and to get guests for all of you. And so I think you've heard over the last couple of weeks, some of the guests I've had have been generated from connections that I made at FinCon. So I went to FinCon to get guests for the podcast, and I accomplished that goal. And so that then created a lot of content for all of you. So when you go to a networking event like this, when you go to a big group event, when you go to a conference, what is your goal? It shouldn't be to sell a lot of stuff. It should be more to make connections that will let you sell more stuff in the future, whether that be your book, whether that be your podcast, your YouTube channel, your blog, your business, your company, whatever it is you're trying to sell. When you go to a networking event, set up those one-to-ones so that you can create those connections after the event, and then you can sell whatever it is that you're trying to sell. The last thing that I'm going to talk about here, and I think I did a little bit before, dealing with multiples of the same referral sources. And I think I have already covered that a little bit. So in other words, if you are fed by a lot of the same profession, you get your referrals by a lot of the same profession, you have to think of some interesting tips and tricks and strategies in order to keep those referral sources motivated so they don't move on, because it's going to be rare that you can give them a referral back. In fact, as I talk about this episode and as I think about this episode itself, I mean, that could be one of the uses of my Crushing Debt book, is to give that book to a realtor as a referral source so that they can then use it to refer back to me. So that's about it for this week's episode. I every once in a while deviate from a specific crushing debt type topic because I think it's important to give you all additional content in terms of my experience in growing my law firm. I've got a couple different businesses that I support here. The primary business is the law firm. I think the podcast has taken on a life and a business life and an entity life of its own, as well as the book, as well as what I do to educate other business owners through BNI and through other sources here in the Tampa Bay area. So if you want me to come out and talk about more information, I can definitely talk about legal topics. I can talk about some networking topics. I can definitely connect you with Jason Avery. I can connect you with Tiffanie Kellog. I can connect you with a lot of the top sales and marketing and referral-based marketing experts in the Tampa Bay area. If you're outside of the Tampa Bay area, I am sure that for the right price, a lot of these people would come to you to do presentations for you. So if you have any of those, if you want any of those types of connections, please reach out to me. Again, check out Amazon.com, Crushing Debt, 9 Strategies to Eliminate the Financial Bullies in Your Life. I would love to get a couple more books in a couple more hands here. So I would love for you to go on Amazon and order the book. The Kindle version of the book is coming. It's not ready quite yet. I've got to learn more about how to create the Kindle version of the book, but the Kindle version, the electronic version of the book is coming. Also, one of my goals in 2019 is to get the book up on the audio player, the book audio player. I forget what it's called right now, but one of my goals is to get it up there as well for you guys to download and listen to the book, to the Crushing Debt book as well. But that, I think, will do it for this week's episode of the podcast. I really appreciate all of you listening to the show week after week. I do definitely see the increase in numbers. I've generated a few clients off the podcast here. I've sold a bunch of copies of the book off the podcast. So I really appreciate it. As we wind down 2018 and look forward to 2019, I would anticipate doing an episode soon here about goal setting and all that kind of stuff. So look for that one. And if you have any questions that you want me to answer on future episodes of the podcast, please email me, Shawn, SHAWN, at yesnerlaw.com, YESNER law.com. That's also the website, www.yesnerlaw.com. I think that's it for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast. Stop that there. So Facebook, we are done with at least with the recording. So let me get the recording set up. Let me get the the recording set up here, and I will look to Facebook Live to answer some of the questions that are on here. Give me one quick second. Export. Give me one quick minute here so I can do this. I like to get the episode saved in case something happens to the computer. Okay, so that is in process. While I do that, let me turn back to Facebook Live. So thank you all for joining on Facebook Live. Yeah, thanks, Warren. One of the things I talked about on the show was how to give back to multiple referral sources. One of Warren's comments, you give back by taking care of our clients. Great job. So yeah, thank you. That is definitely one way, and that is one of my goals. But know that one of my goals is to get you some more business directly rather than just doing good and taking care of your clients. Christy, I don't know if you're still on. Christy Arkovich has been a guest on the show a couple times. Probably need to get Christy on again. Christy's focus is on eliminating student loan debt, both inside and outside of bankruptcy. She also does, similar to what I do, a lot of creditor harassment litigation. So, yeah, Larry Heinkel, Christy Arkovich said that Larry Heinkel gave a great seminar on eliminating taxes to the Tampa Bay Bankruptcy Bar Association. I definitely need to get Larry on the show. Those of you that have questions about how to eliminate taxes, I'll look to get Larry on the show as well. Other than that, it looks like I don't have any other people that are watching or that have questions or whatever. So that will wrap up this behind the scenes look of the Crushing Debt podcast. Again, those of you that want to check out Podfest Expo, you can just type in Podfest Expo on Google. That'll take you to the registration page. The 2019 version is coming up at the beginning of March. And then I assume if you're listening to this after March of 2019, you can type Podfest into a Google search, and it'll tell you when we're going to have 2020 and 21 and beyond. I know that 2019, the one coming up in March, is the 5-year anniversary of Podfest, and so I look forward to being there. I submitted my speaker submission. I don't know if Podfest is going to have me back to speak this year, but we'll see. So that's it for this week's behind the scenes recording of the podcast episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Look for this episode probably the 3rd week of December, and we'll talk to you in the next one. Thanks a lot. I've got to go now be with my wife and kids, so I will sign off for now. Thanks a lot, everybody.